Drets i Estudis Afroamericans. El senyor Powell és conegut per la seva teoria de l'alteritat, que descriu el procés de marginalització de grups socials. Sosté que aquest fenomen és una de les causes principals del racisme estructural i de la desigualtat social, i que per superar-ho és essencial crear una pertinença compartida on tothom se senti inclòs i valorat. No farem més preàmbuls perquè tenim moltes ganes de sentir-lo. Senyores congressistes, senyors congressistes, estudiants de Granollers, un fort aplaudiment per John Powell.
Good morning. It's a delight to be here this morning and to share some time with you, but more importantly, to celebrate the important work that you do. And this work is even more important given what's happening in the world today. I'm from University of California in Berkeley, California, United States. I came in late last night. But I feel like it's really important to be here, and I look forward to an ongoing relationship with you because, again, I think your work is so important for the whole world today. So I want to acknowledge and celebrate you and the work that you do. So I have a PowerPoint, and as a good friend of mine says, for PowerPoint you only need two things, power and a point. I hope I have at least one of those. And if you're taking pictures of the slides, I'll tell you, I'll make them available afterwards so you can have the slide deck so you can use it and peruse it. So let me just jump into it. Cities building belonging through trust. So I run something called the Othering and Belonging Institute. Othering and belonging. And as this slide suggests, I'm suggesting that the problem of the 21st century is the problem of othering. And that's a funny word. So what do we mean by othering? Basically, othering is basically saying some people or some group is not accorded the same dignity or respect. They're not seen as important. They're not seen as mattering as much as other groups. And it can be based on any number of things. It can be based, we can make it up. It can be based on a person's race, a person's age, a person's ability, a person's language, a person's religion. And we tell stories about them and we say they're not deserving in some way. They're not really part of us. And at the extreme, we even say they're dangerous. And here are some of the ways in which we other people. The important thing about this is to realize it's not natural. So once we define someone as other, define someone as different, then we think they're naturally different. That one race is different than another race. From a biological perspective, I believe most of you know this already, race doesn't even exist. And yet we tell a story about it, and it seems like not only does it exist, that it's inevitable, it has to exist. It's a sociological construct, but once it's in place, it becomes a social reality. And sometimes it's not just race, sometimes it's gender, sometimes it's how tall we are, or how short we are. One of the largest genocides in the 20th century was out of Rwanda. And many of you know that. In Rwanda, the people were the same race, same religion, same language, in many cases the same ethnicity and same tribe. And the story was told that if you didn't have a certain number of cows, if you had less than 3 cows, you were the other. You didn't belong. And based on that, they started literally, after living together for decades, they started actually killing each other. Who is the other? This person only has 2 cows. They can't be part of our group. Now, when we hear that, that sounds absurd. And it is absurd. But it's the way we tell stories, and those stories help define who we are, help define who the other is. So part of the things is, can we tell different stories? I'm from the United States, and I visited many countries, but including Northern Ireland. And talking to people there, and they would say, those people over there, you can't trust them, they're Catholics. And I would say, how do you know they're Catholics? How can you tell? And they said, look at the way they move, it's obvious. It wasn't obvious to me. I wasn't sensitive to that. And so it's important, the different ways we other people is deciding who belongs and who's accorded respect. So this problem of othering, which also shows up as racism, shows up as xenophobia, shows up as religious phobia, shows up all these different ways. Why is it so prevalent in the world today? Why is othering happening not just in the United States, not just in Spain, not just in Europe, not just in Africa, not just in Latin America? It's happening everywhere. Why are people turning against each other? And one of the reasons is change itself. When change happens at a rapid pace, it creates anxiety, not just for humans, but for other animals as well. So there's some research that suggests if you change your primary relationship, where you live, and your job in a 2-year period, your chances of having a heart attack goes up 50%. And that's assuming that you got a good job and you got a good new partner. If you got a bad job and a terrible partner, you're already dead. The issue is that we can only process a small amount of change in a short period of time. If the change is spread out over years or even decades, we can handle it. We can adjust to it. That's not just true for us, it's true for other animals as well. So what's happening in the world today is the speed of change is accelerating. Things are changing faster than we can process it. And in this speed, we're feeling anxious. For example, we're dealing with change around health. We're just still thinking about COVID-19, and now we're also thinking about Ebola. We're looking at technological change. Is AI a good thing that's going to help us, it's going to cure cancer, or is it a bad thing? Is it going to destroy humanity? Climate change. Is it supposed to be this hot this early in the year? Should we be concerned about that? Economic change. Am I going to have a job next week, next year? There are young people here. When I graduate from college or high school, will I have a job? Is there a place for me? And of course, the demographic change. We're watching the world change demographically all over the world. And here in Europe, for example, immigration is a big issue. Surprisingly, it's also a big issue in Africa. South Africans are worried about non-South Africans coming to South Africa. And it's a contradiction as well because, again, in the United States, our president is very hostile to the idea of immigrants. At the same time, we're saying we need immigrants to actually work in our hospitals, to work in our fields. So there's both a need and a fear. So when we experience this rapid change, and this change is going to accelerate, it's not going to slow down. The world is going to demand more of us. How do we make sense of it? We know the world is changing, but we don't necessarily know what it means. We make sense of it by telling stories. And there are 2 structures that I want to focus on in terms of how we tell stories. One structure is called a breaking structure. In a breaking structure, we say, yes, things are changing, and it's scary, and it's their fault. It's the immigrants' fault. It's the old people's fault. It's the gay people's fault. We blame the other for our anxiety. And we say if we could just take care of the other, if we could keep the other away from us, if we could send them back to their own country, we'd be better. That's called the breaking story, where we're not just talking about difference, we're saying the other is a threat to our very way of living. They're a threat to our civilization. They're a threat to our jobs. They're a threat to our well-being. Most of the stories we see on social media and in the newspaper are breaking stories. They're stories about some other. The other way of talking about it is to say, yes, things are changing. We are changing. We're becoming more diverse. But we can talk to each other. We can listen to each other. We can learn from each other. We can educate each other. We can build a larger we. And in order to do that, we have to engage with each other. That's called a bridging story. So those are two types of stories. One is a breaking story, and the other one's a bridging story. And I would suggest that the work you do is about bridging. You're trying to help people sort of understand themselves and help people understand the other. So part of the message in my talk today is, can we engage in bridging stories? And where we cannot, for whatever reason, can we at least avoid breaking stories? Let me just say a little bit more about breaking stories. When you see another human being, there's a part of your brain that lights up. It doesn't mean you like the person. It doesn't mean you're going to buy them coffee. It doesn't mean you're going to take them home. Nature thought it would be kind of cool if we recognize our fellow human beings. So just part of the brain lights up, recognition. When you deeply other someone, when you tell stories about someone so that they are really not considered part of your group, that part of the brain does not light up. That is, at an unconscious level, when you deeply other someone, we don't see them as human. In the United States, they did a test. In the United States, one of the groups that we other, deeply other, are people who are homeless. And so they have people in the audience looking at homeless people, and they have them connected so they can see their brain waves. And that part of the brain that recognizes another human being is completely quiet. There's no activity. And then they ask the question, what kind of vegetables do you think those homeless people like? And all of a sudden, that part of the brain that recognizes another human being becomes very active. What's going on? What's going on is that when we experience curiosity about each other, we see each other's humanity. When we don't experience curiosity, this person is homeless, we have stereotypes. They're probably a drug addict, they probably don't have a job, they're a deadbeat, there's something wrong with them. We don't imagine them liking vegetables. We don't imagine them having children. We don't imagine them having pain and sorrow. We don't imagine them being like us. So part of the thing for bridging and for seeing each other's humanity is to be curious, is to engage in curious questions about each other. So what we talk about at the Institute is belonging without othering. Belonging without othering. And you see on this slide 3 pictures. The first is a circle where people are kept outside the circle. That's exclusion. We recognize that in a lot of our immigration policy. We recognize that in things like segregation or apartheid, where we say those people can't be in our neighborhoods. They can't be in our church, our synagogue, or our mosque. They can't be in our country. They are the other. We keep them away from us. The second slide is what we call inclusion. Inclusion is, okay, you can come to my school. I sometimes tell the story that I'm going to give a party. And hopefully most of you will come. So I grew up in Detroit. Some of you may know I just had a birthday yesterday, so I'm getting older every day. But when I come have my party, there's going to be a lot of Motown. I'm also a vegetarian, which means when you come to the party, there's no meat. So we're going to have a lot of Motown, no meat. And because I'm on the other side of 70, the party's going to end at 8 p.m. Now, some of you might say, that's a lame party. Why would I bother even going to such a party? Well, you're welcome to my party, but it's my party. I set the rules. I pick the music. I pick the food. I pick the time. I pick the guests. And you can come, but you have to adhere to all of my rules. That's inclusion. You're included. But what if we said, well, I don't want to go to your party. Can we have a party? Can we do a party together? Can we participate in terms of selecting the food? Maybe we could have some vegetarian food, but maybe we could have some non-vegetarian food. Maybe we could have some Motown, but maybe we'll have some reggae. Maybe we'll have some classical music. We come together and decide together. That's the final picture on the slide. It's belonging. Belonging is when you co-create the thing you belong to. You're not a guest in someone else's story. You're not a guest in someone else's house or someone else's neighborhood. It's your neighborhood too, and you have to come together to make it work for everybody. So belonging is different than inclusion. Inclusion is where you show up as a guest, and as a guest you can be invited to leave. Belonging is where you co-create the very thing you belong to. And belonging requires inclusion. It requires agency. It requires you to have a voice. It requires you to be recognized. And it requires connection. You have to be connected to the thing and to the people around you. So here are two of the big ideas we've already listed. One is called breaking, we talked about. The other one is called bridging. Now, there's short bridges and there are long bridges. So what's a short bridge? A short bridge would be a bridge connecting with someone who you don't get along with. Maybe it's your cousin. Maybe it's your sister or your brother. It's someone that you share a lot with. But you can still have fights with your brother and sister. And when you have fights, you maybe don't talk to each other. They didn't pay you back the $10 they borrowed last year. Or they didn't come to your daughter's graduation, and you're mad. But you have the whole family to help bring you back together. Now, short bridges doesn't mean it's easy. Think about civil wars. In many cases, the worst wars that people experience is when brothers and sisters turn against each other. Also, in short bridges, you know how to hurt each other. I know how to make my brother angry. I know things about him that a stranger would not know. But you have a lot of resources to come together as a family. Then there are long bridges. And long bridges are people that, I don't understand the language. I don't eat the same food. I don't believe in God the same way they do. Last night, one of my closest friends called me up to wish me happy birthday. And he said, "How you doing, John?" And I said, "I'm doing fine." He said, "They're working me too hard in Barcelona." I was there. Barcelona, as you know, is one of the peace cities, maybe the leading peace city in the world. And I was there for a number of activities. So it was wonderful. But it was not a birthday celebration. And so my friend said, "Well, it's great that you're doing that work, but you got to take care of yourself because you only go around once in life." And I said, "What if you're Hindu?" And he said, "We're not Hindu." The point is that even our idea of death is different from other people. So when we don't have the same food, the same language, the same belief in God, the same belief in death, it's like I can't imagine ever being in relationship with that person. Those are long bridges. An example of a long bridge, I have a friend who's a Christian minister, and I said, we need to be open to other people. We need to be willing to engage with people and see the humanity of people who are different than us. And sometimes that difference is long. And he says, so John, are you suggesting that I bridge with the devil? And I said, as a Christian minister, bridging with the devil would indeed be a very long bridge. So don't start there. But also be careful who you call the devil. The point is, when we start bridging, it's like an exercise. And when we exercise, we don't start off by running the marathon tomorrow. We start off by walking around the block. We start off by running maybe a half a mile. And as we get used to it, we can increase that to a mile, maybe 2 miles. And maybe eventually we'll get to 26 miles. So don't start off with the most difficult bridge. Don't start off with the most difficult engagement. Start off with something a little easier. And as we get better, then we can go to longer bridges. So again, breaking stories, there's no room for you in my world. You're a threat to my world. Bridging stories, we're in this together. We are connected to each other. We share stuff. And I'm curious about you. Now, everybody believes in belonging. So belonging, even though you may not be used to the word, everybody believes in belonging. Your family, you belong to this family. When you think of any major religion, it's always organized around the idea of belonging. Whether it's Judaism, Hinduism, Buddhism, Christian, every major religion say the people who are part of this religion are a family. We belong to each other. So belonging has been around for as long as human activity has been around. But usually, in most religions, they create a group that belongs, and at the same time, they create a group that doesn't belong. So if you're a Christian, great. But if you're not a Christian, you're a sinner. If you're a Muslim, great. But if you're not a Muslim, you're an infidel. If you're not Jewish, you're not part of the chosen people. So the idea is that every nation, every religion has organized around belonging. But it's also organized around othering. It's saying, our group belong, they do not belong. And so the challenge for us today, the challenge for you today, is to create belonging without othering. Can we create a world where everyone belongs? Where everyone belongs? And just think for a minute, who in your mind doesn't belong? Which group? Which child doesn't count? Which family doesn't deserve food? So can we create a world where everyone belongs? And we've already made some progress on that effort. Think about the UN Declaration of Human Rights, which starts off with the notion that everybody matters. And when that was enacted in 1948, again, that's not how the world looked. We had just finished a war. 6 million Jews had been killed. In fact, there's a fight between Eleanor Roosevelt, who was one of the principal architects, and W.B. Du Bois, who's one of the greatest American sociologists who ever lived. And Du Bois was actually angry by the UN Declaration of Human Rights. Why was he angry? He said, this is just symbolic. He said, Africa is still colonized. Women can't vote almost anywhere in the world. Black people are segregated in the United States. We just got through seeing 6 million Jews being killed. We're disrupting the land of Palestine. He said, what do you mean? He said, this is just symbolic. And I often say, he was right and he was wrong. He was right that it was symbolic. He was wrong that it was just. Symbolism matters when you do it right. So Eleanor Roosevelt was not describing the world. She was creating an aspiration. She was creating an aspiration. So I can get this open. My father's a Christian minister. He passed away a few years ago. He and my mother were just wonderful people. What does Christian mean? Christian means Christ-like. So my guess is some of you are Christian. How many of you are Christ-like? Islam means surrendering to Allah. How many of you have surrendered to God? So we set these aspirations, we set these things to orient the way we move forward. And we believe that it's important now to move toward belonging without othering. In the United States, J.D. Vance and others, they want belonging, but they want it for a small group of people. Some people are arguing now that the only people who really belong in the United States are Christians. Not even just Christians, Protestants. So Catholics don't really belong. Some people say only white people belong. Only people who... We used to have this argument in the United States, who is the real American? And at one point, we argued in the United States that there are only two kinds of people who are real Americans. Two types of people. Who are they? Anglos and Saxons. Anglos and Saxons. Not Germans, not French, not Italians. Everyone else was a guess. So we're actually trying to go beyond that and say that no, that's not an appropriate way to actually decide who belongs. So I want to just give you 90 seconds to think about a time when you felt a sense of belonging. Have you felt like you belong in your city? What were the circumstances that had created a sense of belonging? And could you think about belonging, however you belong in your city or wherever you live, can you extend that to people who aren't always feeling belonging? So I want to just give you 90 seconds to reflect on that. Okay. Just want you to hold that in as we sort of go forward. Because the idea is that I believe that the work you're already doing is really the same work that we're doing. You use different words, but it's the same idea. How do you make cities, how do you make where you live places where everyone can belong? And belonging with othering, that's negative. That's already being done. That's what actually divides us and polarizes us. We actually require, once you create the other, because the other is largely created, it's a story, how do we actually bridge? How do we get to know the other? So we talked a little about bridging and breaking. So bridging is turning toward the other, breaking is turning against the other. And breaking actually creates the other, is based on fear, and bridging is based on empathy. So I suggested that if these things are not just out there, we organize them through stories, we organize them through narratives. So how do we tell, what's a narrative about bridging? What's the narrative about bonding? So there's another concept. Bonding is another concept I just want to spend a few seconds on. So bridging is when you're turning towards someone. Breaking is when you're turning against them. Bonding is where you say, I care about my family, but I'm not denigrating your family. So bonding is recognizing a relationship without denigrating other relationships. And we'll come back to that in a little bit. My clicker's, okay. So one of the things that you focus on is critical thinking. And I'm going to come back to that in a little bit as well. But I want to add to critical thinking It's the idea of intentional engagement and empathetic listening. So what is empathetic listening? It's different than critical listening. So you can listen to someone to make a mistake. You can listen to show someone up. Or you can actually listen to try to experience what the other person's experiencing. This is what bridging is not. A lot of times when people hear bridging, they think that's too soft, especially in this hard world. And why should we have to compromise with the other side? Bridging is not compromising. Bridging is not agreeing. And it doesn't mean abandoning your values. You can bridge at an interpersonal level. You can bridge at an institutional level or a systemic level. And again, there's short bridges and long bridges, and weak bridges and transactional bridges. And each one of them, the method for doing each one is slightly different. And then there's the idea of thick and thin bonds in cities. What's the difference between a thick bond and a thin bond? Well, a thick bond is when you're really close with someone. A thick bond is when it's almost like family or your partner. It's someone you see and maybe love, engage with every day. A thin bond is where, this is partially the work of Robert Putnam, who wrote a book called Bowling Alone. And he talked about general and specific reciprocity. So thin bond is where you don't have a close relationship with people, but you still have a relationship. You still regard them. It's like just being polite to someone on the streets or tipping someone in the United States. So a thin bond, he argues, is what holds a society together. Everybody doesn't become your family, but you have a general regard for them. You have, if you see them maybe trying to lift something heavy, maybe you'll join them. If you see them hurrying up, maybe you help them in some way. It's a general positive feeling towards your community and a willingness to help your community. Again, it's not a close relationship. And he says that a thin bond is actually more important for creating cohesiveness in a society than a thick bond. So everyone can't be your brother and sister, according to Putnam, but they can be someone that you care about. So reflection, how is your educating city a container that fosters change and encourages bridging? What circumstances makes this possible? Is there a culture of thin bonding in your city? Is there a culture of caring about strangers in your city? So I want you to reflect on this, but this time I'm going to have you do something slightly different. I want you to think about this, but I'm going to give you 2 minutes, and I want you to turn to your neighbor, and each one of you have a little over a minute to talk about how you're doing this work in your own city. How is your educating, is it a container? Is it a place where people can belong? Is your city, the practices in your city, creating belonging, especially with strangers? So again, I'm going to give you 2 minutes, so just turn to your neighbor and reflect on this question. Okay, you have 30 seconds. Okay, let's come back together. Okay, so as we think about bridging and belonging, one of the things to think about is how structures either create a space of belonging and bridging, or structures can create othering. Now there's obvious examples. For example, if there's stairs and someone's in a wheelchair and there's not a ramp, we basically create a structure where the person is not welcome. I fly too much on planes, and sometimes I use examples of overhead luggage racks. There's part of the population that tends to be shorter, and as a group tends to have less upper body strength. What part of the population am I describing? Tends to be shorter and less upper body strength. Anything come to mind? Can you just shout it out? Why? Children, okay. Children, that's certainly true. So who else has less upper body strength and tends to be shorter? Any people in the room fit that bill? Women, right. Okay, so women are majority of the population in the world, and they have less, as a group, less upper body strength and shorter. So what women do as a group, and this is somewhat controversial, women also are likely to have more luggage. As a group, women will actually check their luggage more often than men, even when they have the same luggage. What that means is they have to be at the airport half an hour to 45 minutes before their male counterpart, and they leave the airport half an hour and 45 minutes after their male counterpart, sometimes without their luggage. So there's a structure, again, that actually disadvantages women. And so what we have to do is pay attention to what structures are doing. Structures are doing some work, and they make it harder for some people and easier for other people. And so how do we create structures and stories to say to people, to everyone, that you belong? And different groups will need different things, need different structures to fully belong. And so cities are containers which help create the design of cities. Think about, in the United States, porches used to be in the front. And what that meant is that when you're walking down the street, you would see your neighbors. You could talk to your neighbors. In the 1950s and 60s, we thought, let's put the porches in the back. So now you can actually live in a neighborhood for years and never see your neighbors. They drive in, park the car inside the garage, and they go in the back. That's the structure. The structure making it harder for people to come together. So when you look at structures, what work are structures doing to say you belong or you don't belong? And what we're experiencing now, not just in the United States, but we see a crack in many of our structures that held us together. Public schools, we know there are demonstrations now about schools. There's some attacks by some people to destroy the public schools. Well, the public school is one of the places that we used to come together. Public libraries is another place that maybe we can come together. In Berkeley, Berkeley was very deliberate in making libraries open to everyone, But here became the problem. A lot of people who were unhoused would come to the library and they'd use the bathrooms as if they were at home, not just to go relieve themselves, but to take a shower, to take a bath. And then people who weren't homeless wouldn't go to the library. So what can we do in terms of cities to make them belong to everyone? My partner's in Berlin right now. I'm in Berlin for the summer, and she's commenting, everybody here used the public. Everybody in Berlin used the public. They used the bus, they used the tram. That's not true in the United States. The public, by and large, are for unhoused people and poor people. So middle-class people don't use the public. People don't use public parks, with some exceptions. So how do we construct a city to say to people that it belongs to everyone? This is Bob Marley, and he has a line in one of his songs, and it says, every person, or to paraphrase him, every person thinks his burden is the heaviest. So we tell stories, and I know my burden. I don't know your burden. I think my burden is more important than your burden. I think the burden of my group is more important than the burden of your group. So we belittle other people's stories. In doing so, we belittle them. In doing so, we say to them, your story doesn't really matter. It's my story that matters. So part of the ways in which we create space, belonging, is to say to everyone, everyone's story matters. Everyone's stories matter. And how do we actually elicit those stories? And so when we think about stories, and stories are really important, we think about who's telling the story, who's the hero or the protagonist in the story, who's the villain, who's the audience, who's left out. So when you think about a story, just think about who's telling it, who's the villain, who's the protagonist, and who's left out. And there are ways of listening. We can listen with the mind, and we can listen with the heart. And so what we want to do is to listen with the heart. And I want to know how you feel, not simply what you think. Tell me how you feel. Tell me what's important to you. Tell me who you love. Tell me who you've lost. So one way of actually connecting or bridging is listening with the heart, empathetic listening. So when we talk, the question is, who are we talking to? Who's the audience? I want to suggest to you that we all need to speak lizard. Sort of a trick question, but how many of you, show of hands, how many of you in the audience already speak lizard? Raise your hand. Nobody speaks lizard? Okay. So you're going to leave here today having learned a new language. And it's not going to be Spanish or French, it's going to be lizard. So what is lizard? Okay, so the brain is a complicated organ. In fact, it's not even an organ. It's more complicated than that. If humans were on the earth for 24 hours, in the first hour we develop part of the brain called the amygdala. The amygdala regulates things like fear, anxiety, which we talked about earlier, and emotions, strong emotions. It's the part of the brain that we share with the lizard, which is why we call it the lizard brain. Fear is, by some accounts, the oldest emotions that humans have, and the emotions that humans share with other animals. And we developed that part of the brain in the first hour of our 24-hour existence. The newest part of the brain is called the prefrontal cortex. So the amygdala is in the back, and the brain starts from the back and it comes forward. The newest part of the brain, prefrontal cortex, is only 5 minutes old. It just got here about 5 minutes ago. It doesn't know anything. That's the part of the brain that deals with logic and facts. So when we're afraid, when we're anxious, the amygdala takes over. And you can't talk to the amygdala with facts, with studies, with logic. The amygdala is about feelings. So think about your child, or when you were a child. and there's a monster under your bed. You're being very afraid, and so you have your lights on and the door open, and your parents come and they say, turn out the light. And you say, I can't, there's a monster under the bed. The parents, not speaking lizard, says, that's ridiculous. Let's look under the bed. There's no lizard. There's no monster. And of course, every child knows that the monster disappears as soon as the light comes on, but it comes back when the light is turned off. And the child is wondering, how did I get such stupid parents who don't understand monsters, right? And you say, turn off the light, shut the door. The child is afraid. You haven't quieted their fear. You've insulted them. You've told them they're stupid. Instead, we could say, God, it must be really hard to sleep in a room by yourself with a monster. Maybe I'll lay in bed next to you. So what we see in the world today is the world is anxious. There are lizards running all around the world. And most people, including politicians, don't speak lizard. Trump does. Trump speaks lizard. He appeals to our fears, our anxiety. And he tells stories about them. And we know that some of these stories are ridiculous. Like, there are aliens from another planet who are scaly bodies who are kidnapping our children. That's part of the QAnon story. And we say, that's just crazy. The prefrontal cortex looks at that and said, that's completely illogical. Or when they say Haitians are stealing our cats and eating them for breakfast, and said, that's ridiculous. Or when we say Muslims are taking over India, I said, it doesn't add up. It's factually wrong. But we're making factual claims to the lizard. That's not the way you talk to the lizard. You have to acknowledge that the lizard is afraid. And fear is, the reason we have fear is important in terms of human existence. So how do we actually, again, not agree, not saying, yes, you're right, but acknowledging that the person is afraid, acknowledging that they're anxious, and showing empathy toward, not agreement, empathy. So all of us need to become better at really lizard language. And what the lizard is most afraid of is not belonging. So when you think of an authoritarian leader, they start off with the same script. The story is, we're going to make America great again, which means there was some period of time that America was great. In India, we're going to make India great again. So to remind me, when was India great? And what they said, some of these people, not exaggerating, say it used to be a long time ago, India used to have cosmonauts. They flew through the universe in planes or jets that could almost go the speed of light. And you said, that's ridiculous. That didn't happen. You're right. It is ridiculous. But what the lizard likes that story, right? It's like, remember when I was a cosmonaut? So two things. Make America great again. Go to the past, because the future is too scary. I don't want the future. The future, things are changing. Stop the future. I want to go back to the past. And then the other part of the authoritarian story is, if you're having problems, if you couldn't get up this morning because it's the immigrants' fault. If you have a toothache, it's black people's fault. If you're not getting, the job you wanted, it's somebody else's fault. So it's the other. So the other becomes the goat of all the bad stuff. And then the final thing is, you belong. You belong, and the reason you don't feel like you belong is because of those other people. So the authoritarian story really talks to the lizard and create a false belonging based on othering. And so part of critical thinking is to engage with this. But here's the thing. Critical thinking in terms of analysis, which most of you probably are aware of, is, no pun intended, critical thinking in terms of analysis is critical. But not enough. because critical thinking by itself doesn't necessarily engage empathetic listening. It doesn't necessarily engage the lizard. It doesn't necessarily engage systems or dialogue, right? So dialogue is about listening, not to prove the other person wrong, but to find out how the other person feels. It requires co-creation, and the critical piece you're trying to reach is not right or wrong, is relationship. Where you go in critical and empathetic listening is to have a human relationship. So think about it. What kind of thinking, critical thinking, are you engaged in your city? Does it not only think about analysis, but does it also think about relationships? How do I actually see you? How do I actually listen to you with my heart? How do we build a bigger we, and how do we build a more diverse city? I have about 3 more slides and then I'm going to end. So the hope for the future is one about belonging without othering. And there's one of the ways we talk about doing this is something called targeted universalism. And what it entails is universal goals, targeted strategies. Universal goals and targeted strategies. What are universal goals? No child should go to bed hungry, a universal goal. We all can agree on. How do we get there? We have different strategies for different populations because people are situated differently. We are connected to each other. So people oftentimes say, how do we actually make belonging happen? I say, it's already here. COVID-19 just demonstrated to us just how profoundly interconnected we are. We object to that, we fight against it, but it's a reality. So what we need to do is a new story, a story that acknowledges our reciprocal relationship with each other, a story that is not my story and your story, but our story. And this is from Harari's book, Sapien. He argues that, in a sense, human superpower is our ability to collaborate, our ability to tell stories. And how far we can go is not clear. We have not reached the end. So I'm going to end by just saying we're trying to create a pluralistic world. We're trying to create a world where everyone belongs. And we're doing that through cities, we're doing it through education. I just got the T signal, which I think means time. What difference does a difference make? Meaning, those depend on, it's not the difference that matters, it's what difference, it's the stories we tell about difference. And if you want to examine more of this, I've written 2 books on this subject that are available. Belonging Without Othering is one, and the other one is The Power of Bridging. Thank you.
Moltes gràcies, senyor Powell. Thank you, Mr. Powell. Va, perfecte. Hem obert la sessió de dijous i ara toca una mica d'esmorzar. Us sembla bé? Doncs tenim 30 minutets, mitja horeta, per fer una mica d'esmorzar. Un poco de desayuno, little breakfast.